It was just another Tuesday for Maxwell Grant. His shiny Italian shoes clicked against the pavement as he walked through one of the city's poorest neighborhoods. He wasn't supposed to be there. His driver had taken a wrong turn, but something caught his eye. There, under a tree, sat a small girl surrounded by 5 other children. She couldn't have been more than 9 years old, but she was pointing at pages in a tattered book, teaching the others to read. Maxwell froze in place, his briefcase suddenly feeling heavy in his hand. The little girl had no shoes, her clothes were worn thin, yet she spoke with such conviction, such purpose. He stood there watching for nearly 20 minutes, mesmerized by how this child commanded respect from the others. When one of the children spotted him and the group scattered in fear, only the girl remained, clutching her precious book to her chest. "I'm sorry if we're not supposed to be here," she said, her eyes showing no fear, just resignation. That's when Maxwell noticed the small cardboard sign propped against the tree, "Reading lessons, pay what you can." He approached slowly, crouching down to her level. "I'm Maxwell," he said softly. "What's your name?" The girl hesitated before answering. "Hope," she finally said. "Hope Sullivan." Maxwell couldn't stop thinking about how articulate Hope was for a child living in such poverty. "Where do you go to school?" he asked, already suspecting the answer. Hope looked down. "I don't," she said. "I take care of my brother during the day while my mom works her 3 jobs." She pointed to a sleeping toddler beneath a blanket he hadn't noticed before. "But I teach these kids what I learn from books I find. Everyone should know how to read." Maxwell felt something shift inside him. This child understood something about purpose that many adults in his wealthy circles had forgotten. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, intending to give her some money, but stopped himself. Something told him this wasn't about charity. "What would you do if you could go to school?" he asked instead. Hope's eyes lit up, and for the first time, she looked like the child she was. "Everything. I'd learn about planets and animals and history and math and how to write stories." She hesitated, then added more quietly, "and maybe become a teacher someday, a real one." Maxwell felt a lump forming in his throat. He made a decision in that moment that would change both their lives forever. Hope led Maxwell 3 blocks to a run-down apartment building. As they climbed to the 4th floor, the elevator had been broken for months. Maxwell noticed how Hope checked on her brother every few steps, adjusting the blanket around him with practiced care. The apartment was tiny but meticulously clean. Photos hung on the walls in inexpensive frames, mostly of Hope and her brother at different ages. A woman was sleeping on the couch, clearly exhausted from working overnight. Hope gently woke her. "Mom, this is Mr. Maxwell. He saw me teaching today." The woman startled awake, immediately apologizing for her daughter bothering such an important-looking man. Maxwell shook his head. "Your daughter wasn't bothering anyone. In fact, she's the most impressive teacher I've seen in years." As Hope's mother, Sarah, made coffee with shaking hands, Maxwell learned their story. How she'd been widowed 3 years ago, how medical bills had taken everything, how she worked cleaning offices at night, a diner in the morning, and retail on weekends. What struck Maxwell most was how, despite everything, Sarah had instilled such values in Hope. "She gets her brains from her father," Sarah said with sad pride. "He was studying to be an engineer when we met. Always said education was the way out." She showed Maxwell a photo of Hope's father, and something about the man's eyes, the same determined expression Hope had, made Maxwell reach for the locket he always wore under his shirt. His birth mother had left it with him at the orphanage 40 years ago. Inside was a tiny photo of his parents and a baby, himself, and an inscription, "Sullivan family forever." Maxwell's hands trembled as he asked Sarah about her husband's family. "James was an orphan," she explained. "Never knew his parents. But he always hoped he had siblings somewhere. That's why we named our daughter Hope." Maxwell could hardly breathe as he opened his locket and showed her the photo. Sarah's coffee cup crashed to the floor. "That's James's face, as a baby. And those people." The DNA test confirmed what Maxwell had already felt in his heart. James Sullivan had been his younger brother, separated in the foster system after their parents' accident. The discovery shook Maxwell to his core. All these years, he'd been searching for something to fill the emptiness inside him. He'd built skyscrapers, acquired companies, donated to charities, Yet nothing had given him the sense of belonging he craved. Now, sitting in Hope's modest living room, surrounded by photos of his brother's family, Maxwell finally understood what had been missing. It wasn't wealth or success, it was connection. The universe had brought him here, through a wrong turn and a chance encounter, to reunite with a family he never knew he had lost. "Would you like to see where I teach sometimes?" Hope asked the following day, seemingly unaware of how profoundly she'd changed Maxwell's world. They walked to a small public library where the librarian greeted Hope like an old friend. "She comes every Saturday," the woman explained to Maxwell. "Helps the younger children with reading comprehension. She has a gift." Maxwell watched as Hope sat cross-legged on a colorful rug, surrounded by children hanging on her every word. She didn't just read to them, she transported them, changing her voice for each character, asking questions that made them think. Maxwell had attended the finest universities, had lectured in boardrooms across the globe, yet he'd never witnessed teaching as pure and effective as what this 9-year-old orphan was doing with nothing but instinct and compassion. "How did you learn to teach like this?" he asked her afterward. Hope shrugged. "I just think about what helped me understand, and then I do that." Such simple wisdom, yet Maxwell could name a dozen education experts who had missed this fundamental truth. Later, as they shared ice cream cones on a park bench, Maxwell made his proposal. "Hope, I'd like to help you and your family, not just with money, but with opportunities." Hope considered his words carefully, with that same serious expression that reminded him so much of the brother he'd never known. "My mom always says we don't take handouts," she said finally. "We earn our way." Maxwell smiled, recognizing the Sullivan pride that apparently ran in the family. "This isn't a handout," he explained. "It's family taking care of family. And besides, you've already earned it, by teaching me something I'd forgotten." Hope tilted her head. "What did I teach you?" Maxwell looked out at the park, where children played without the burden of adult worries. "That wealth isn't just what you have in the bank. It's what you share with others." Over the next 6 months, life changed dramatically for the Sullivan family. Sarah was able to quit her second and third jobs to focus on nursing school, a dream she'd abandoned when James fell ill. Maxwell found them a comfortable apartment in a safer neighborhood, close enough to Hope's new private school that she could walk there each morning. But perhaps the most significant change was in Maxwell himself. Board members at his company were shocked when he announced a new initiative, the Sullivan Learning Centers, designed to identify and support gifted children from underprivileged backgrounds. The first center would open in Hope's old neighborhood. "You seem different," his executive assistant remarked one afternoon, as Maxwell reviewed architectural plans for the learning center. "Happier." Maxwell nodded, realizing it was true. The relentless drive that had defined his career for decades, always more, always better, always pushing forward, had transformed into something deeper and more meaningful. He still worked hard, but now he had Sunday dinners to look forward to, homework to help with, a family photo on his desk that he glanced at whenever decisions became difficult. "I found what I was looking for," he told her simply. "I just didn't know I was looking for it." The grand opening of the first Sullivan Learning Center coincided with Hope's 10th birthday. As a surprise, Maxwell had arranged for the center's library to feature a special collection of books about teachers who had changed history, from and Sullivan to Jamie Escalante. "This is how legacies are built," he told Hope as she explored the shelves with wide eyes. "Not with money or buildings, but with ideas that live on through others." Hope ran her fingers along the spines of the books, her expression solemn. "Do you think my dad would be proud?" she asked quietly. Maxwell felt his throat tighten. "I know he would," he said. "Because I never even met him, and I'm proud already." That evening, at Hope's birthday dinner, Maxwell presented her with a leather-bound journal. "Your father wanted to be an engineer," he said. "He wanted to build things that would last. You might become a teacher, or something else entirely. This is for you to sketch your dreams, whatever they are." Hope opened the journal reverently, then looked up at Maxwell with determination in her eyes. "I want to open more learning centers," she said. "One in every neighborhood like ours." Sarah laughed softly at her daughter's ambition, but Maxwell nodded seriously. "Then we'd better start planning," he said. "Sullivan family forever?" Hope grinned, repeating the phrase from his locket. "Sullivan family forever." 5 years passed, and the single learning center grew into a network of 10 facilities across the city. Hope, now 14, had developed into a poised young woman who still volunteered as a reading tutor every weekend. Maxwell had transitioned from CEO to chairman at his company, devoting more time to the Sullivan Foundation they'd established together. One evening, as they left the newest learning center after a board meeting, Hope asked a question that caught Maxwell off guard. "Do you ever think about how different everything would be if your driver hadn't taken that wrong turn that day?" Maxwell considered this as they walked to the car. "I used to think it was chance," he said finally. "Now I think maybe it was the universe course-correcting." The documentary film about their story premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival when Hope was 16. From Under the Tree traced the journey of both Hope and Maxwell, her rise from informal teacher to educational advocate, his transformation from isolated businessman to passionate mentor. The film captured intimate moments. Hope's first day at her new school, Maxwell learning to cook family recipes with Sarah, the ribbon-cutting ceremonies at each new learning center. But the scene that moved audiences most was surprisingly simple. Hope and Maxwell sitting side by side on a park bench, reading from the same tattered copy of The Secret Garden that had started everything. "What would you tell other people who feel something missing in their lives?" the interviewer asked Maxwell at the film's premiere. He thought for a moment, his hand automatically reaching for the locket he still wore. "Look around you," he said finally. "The connection you're seeking might be closer than you think. Sometimes we're so busy looking at the big picture that we miss the details. A child teaching under a tree, a name that sounds familiar, a photograph that stirs a memory." Hope, elegant in her first formal gown, squeezed his hand. "And sometimes," she added, "the wrong turn is exactly the right one." As Hope prepared for college, Maxwell found himself reflecting on their journey. The frightened businessman who had stumbled upon a child teaching under a tree had been transformed as much as Hope had. His friends in the corporate world often commented on the change, how he listened more intently, laughed more easily, made decisions with broader considerations in mind. "You've gone soft," one colleague teased after Maxwell approved an extended parental leave policy at his company. Maxwell shook his head. "Not soft," he corrected. "Clear. I finally understand what matters." That clarity had come from watching Hope grow, from Sunday dinners with Sarah, from building something that would outlast his own success. On the day Hope left for university, the first Sullivan in generations to attend college, Maxwell drove her to campus himself. They passed the tree where they'd first met, now surrounded by a small garden maintained by students from the learning center. "We should stop," Hope suggested. Sitting beneath the leafy branches, Maxwell marveled at how this unremarkable spot had become the pivot point around which his entire life had turned. "I've been thinking about the inscription in your locket," Hope said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Sullivan family forever. Do you think that's true? That family connections never really break, even when we're separated?" Maxwell looked at this remarkable young woman, his niece, his purpose, his legacy. "I think they can bend and stretch," he said. "But the real ones, the ones that matter, they always find a way back." What started with one child teaching under a tree had blossomed into 25 Sullivan Learning Centers nationwide, with plans for international expansion. Hope's educational methods, based on her instinctive approach to teaching, had been developed into a curriculum used by schools across the country. Maxwell still marveled at how completely his life had changed since that chance encounter. The emptiness that had once driven him to accumulate wealth and power had been filled not with possessions but with purpose. Sunday family dinners, graduation ceremonies at the learning centers, long conversations with Hope about her dreams for the future. "You know," he told her during her college graduation celebration, "most people spend their lives searching for meaning. You had yours figured out at 9 years old." Hope smiled. That same thoughtful expression that had first caught his attention now matured into confident serenity. "I had good examples," she said. "Dad's determination, Mom's sacrifice, your vision." She paused, looking around at the gathered family. Sarah, her brother now a teenager himself, Maxwell, and dozens of graduates from the learning centers who had become extended family over the years. "But mostly, I think we all just needed to be seen, really seen, for who we were. You saw me that day, teaching with my worn-out book and cardboard sign. And somehow, that made me see more in myself." Maxwell nodded, understanding perfectly. In recognizing Hope's value, he had rediscovered his own. In helping her find her path, he had finally found his. Have you ever wondered how many life-changing encounters we miss every day? How many connections go unmade because we're too busy looking at our phones or thinking about our next meeting? Maxwell's story reminds us that sometimes the most important turn in life's journey is the wrong one, the detour that leads us exactly where we need to be. The miracle isn't just that Maxwell found his brother's family, it's that he was open to seeing them, truly seeing them, when so many in his position would have walked by without a second glance. How might your life change if you paused long enough to notice the quiet determination around you? What connections are waiting to be discovered in your own community? What gifts might you offer, beyond money, that could transform not just another's life but your own? Remember that Hope wasn't asking for charity when Maxwell found her. She was already giving everything she had. Sometimes the greatest act of generosity is simply acknowledging someone's value and helping them share their gifts with the world. The Sullivan Learning Centers began with a simple acknowledgement that brilliance exists everywhere, often unrecognized and unsupported. That acknowledgement changed everything, for Hope, for Maxwell, and eventually for thousands of children across the country. But it started with one person deciding to truly see another. That's something all of us can do, regardless of our bank accounts. We can pause in our busy lives long enough to notice the determination in others. We can validate efforts that might otherwise go unrecognized. We can use whatever platform we have to amplify voices that struggle to be heard. And in doing so, we might just discover, as Maxwell did, that in our efforts to help others, we end up finding pieces of ourselves we never knew were missing. The most powerful stories aren't fictional. They're happening all around us, every day, often unnoticed. They're in the determination of a child who refuses to let circumstances dictate their future. Has this story touched something in you? Perhaps it's awakened a desire to look more closely at your community, to use your resources in service of others' potential, to seek out family you might not yet know you have. Don't let this moment pass without action. Consider how you might apply the lessons of the Sullivan family in your own life. Whatever form it takes, remember that the most powerful changes often begin with simple recognition, seeing the worth in another human being when circumstances have conspired to hide it. Like Maxwell, you might discover that in helping change someone else's life, you end up transforming your own in ways you never imagined possible. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications to hear more stories that remind us of our shared humanity and the extraordinary connections waiting to be discovered all around us.